The TEFLologists have written a book, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, details the emergence of the podcast as a tool for professional development, engagement, and personal investment, as well as providing a guide to setting up your own podcast. Featuring a foreword by Thomas Farrell, this is the first book written for language teachers hoping to make connections between the podcasting medium and their own professional development. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is released by the independent publishing collective The Round, which has produced ebooks by Scott Thornbury, Nikki Hockley, Lindsay Clanfield, and many others. For a full list of titles, visit theround.com. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is available on The Round and directly through Amazon, and all profits from sales will go back into producing the TEFLology Podcast. Pick up a copy and support the show.
Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. Today we bring you an interview with Gabriel Díaz-Maggioli. Gabriel is director of the LUDUS Center, the Faculty of Professional Development Center of the Catholic University of Uruguay. Gabriel's research focuses on teacher education, pedagogy, and professional development, amongst other areas. His published books include 2004's Teacher-Centered Professional Development and 2012's Teaching Language Teachers, Scaffolding Professional Learning. The interview was conducted at last year's JALT conference after Gabriel had just delivered his plenary presentation titled Shaping the Way We Grow, Teachers and Development. In the interview, Matt asked Gabriel questions about continuing professional development, teacher education, and the teaching of teachers. A short and written version of the forthcoming interview will appear in JALT's The Language Teacher magazine later this year. We'd like to thank the organisation for setting up this interview.
Okay, so I'm sitting here with Gabriel Díaz-Maggioli, and we're at the JALT 2017 conference in Scuba City. Gabriel has just given his plenary earlier this morning, and I'll be asking you some questions related to your plenary and also related to teacher training.
Great, thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, maybe we could begin with, could you tell us what got you interested in teacher development as a research discipline?
Well, basically, I think it was mostly having worked for many years in a country where there were very few resources, where being a language teacher was not considered a profession. And it was mostly a quest to support my colleagues and myself in procuring new ways of doing things. Also, living in a country where there were no graduate programs in education.
Right.
So how did we grow as a nation if we didn't do research, if we didn't get into more professionally sound practices?
I see, okay. And how has the situation changed? I believe you're from Uruguay?
I'm originally from Uruguay. I worked for many years there, on and off. It hasn't changed much. We still don't have an MA in TESL, for example, in that program in the country.
Really?
It's a program that I'm looking forward to opening next year, if the Ministry of Education allows us to do so.
Yeah. One of our previous interviewees on the show was from Venezuela.
Venezuela.
And he was talking about, he made a lot of comparisons between the political upheaval there and the situation for teachers as workers. How much are the two intertwined?
I think teachers are principally political workers.
Okay. Right.
Because you espouse a certain ideology of teaching, which sometimes may be in line or not with the commonly held political views of the country or the majority of the population. But nevertheless, teachers are always there at the forefront of either answering the questions or posing the questions and making change happen, right? So essentially political beings who do not need to politicize the profession or their teaching. I like to see myself as a cultural worker, and as such, what I do is I'm kind of a broker between what my students need to learn because of particular needs and the society in which they're going to be working.
I see. So you're kind of the middle.
Exactly. Helping them read the profession within the context, the political context of our society, and at the same time allowing them to develop personally in the profession.
You said that maybe teachers are kind of political beings, perhaps?
Oh, 100%. I mean,
in what sense? Like basically.
Well, basically, in the sense that what we're doing is all the time reading the context and making decisions on behalf of our students. In the case of teacher educators, it's even harder because we, as teacher educators, are responsible not just for the teachers we train or educate. We are ultimately responsible for the opportunities that their students, the students they are going to teach, who are invisible to us, are going to have in the future. So from that point of view, I consider myself as a political professional, right? Because I'm making very tough decisions on behalf of people I don't know.
I see, yeah. And during your plenary today, you talked about the kind of sticky issue of CPD, continuing professional development within institutions.
Yes.
To what extent is that a political maneuver, doing professional development?
It's a weird topic and it's a weird situation because in any other profession, there's absolutely no question that professionals, that whoever employs a professional needs to invest on the professional getting better. In education, I see a reticence on the part of many school systems, governments, and of course in proprietary schools also owners, who don't see this as an investment in the future of their own institution. So from that point of view, I think that the time has come because there's you see, in our profession, everything comes in cycles, right? And there was a cycle of professional development in the 90s. Now we're having another cycle. Why is it raising interest? Unfortunately, I also have to confess that our profession is not just a profession, but it's an industry, and it's a huge industry, right? Some very raw data between 2005 and 2010, the sale of books in the English language teaching books produced in the United Kingdom went from 17% to 26%.
Wow.
That is a huge chunk of the gross domestic product of the UK. The same happens with every English-speaking country. Because of that, those books or those materials, let's say, are produced for a world where teachers are not properly qualified or there are not enough teachers. So I think the industry now is making a move towards professional development. And here's where I like to chip in the political bit. Is it because people are convinced that teachers deserve this, or is it because it's an economically wise move?
Right. Yeah.
You train the teachers to use the new materials, to use the new paradigms, and then you withdraw the support once you get a critical mass who can do it. What I'm advocating for is completely different. It's for teachers to be able to work in communities of like-minded individuals, learning together and from one another.
Yeah. On a more micro level, in terms of like one institution, for example, I often find that a teacher who wants to engage in professional development and ask questions could be seen as a form of kind of resistance.
Oh, yeah.
Have you felt that too? Or?
I generally give a workshop on professional development, and I start with some questions like, if you're a manager, would you hire a teacher who asks you up front, what professional development opportunities do I have and what budget am I going to have? And would you hire a teacher that says, look, this year I'm going to be away 3 times for 2 weeks because I'm presenting at conferences? And overwhelmingly, the answers are no, I wouldn't hire a teacher. However, if you stop to think about it, I mean, a teacher who's concerned about their own professional development or who pursues professional development by presenting at conferences is an invaluable asset to any institution. So why are we not perceived as assets? We are perceived as problems, right? So at the level of individual institutions, I think a lot of awareness raising needs to be done. Still needs to be done.
And you talked about some of a kind of a framework for professional development. I wonder if you could go into that. There's kind of 4 parts.
It's basically the intersection of 2 variables. One variable that has to do with knowledge and the other one with awareness. And by crossing the 2 variables, how aware or unaware a professional is about his or her own knowledge, and how updated or outdated that knowledge is. You can create 4 little quadrants. The thing is, as a professional, I'm in all 4 quadrants. But my professional development will be contingent upon my particular learning needs. Say, for example, many teacher educators around the world become teacher educators because they are great classroom teachers, but they are not properly prepared for that. So I'm a great classroom teacher. My students love me. I teach the most amazing lessons. I'm changing context. I become a novice. So I'm somebody who is aware that their knowledge base for the new job is faulty. I will need particular forms of professional development there. But I won't need, for example, classroom management. I won't need professional development on using technology. And what happens most of the times is that institutions look at what is available out there. Or somebody comes to the institution and says, I have this speaker here for 2 months. Okay, bring him over. And so I consider that professional development as it is done today is decontextualized. It's also decisions are made top down. Very seldom are teachers asked, what do you need, right? Or what would you like to do on professional development? My best experiences with this framework, we have a professional development committee, and the professional development committee is run by teachers. There's one administrator that sits in that committee because of financial reasons, but decisions are made after consultation with the faculty, and it's instead of being top down, it's very bottom up. Now, I mentioned also in my plenary Silvana Richardson, who gave the TEFL plenary last year.
It was a very popular.
Oh, absolutely. And you see, again, that's a way that Peter Mejias started back in the 90s. And he wrote the book literally on the non-native teacher. And he opened up these possibilities. But again, the profession forgot about it, and it's back again through Silvana. Well, Silvana and I have just finished writing a white paper for on professional development for a big publisher. And one of Silvana's ideas that complements my teacher's choice framework, that is what I call it, she made this very interesting observation as we were writing. I mean, you're all for the teacher, right? But how about the institution? Institutions also have development plans. So we ended up sorting out professional development as having 2 layers. A layer that is, if you wish, I don't want to call it mandated, but designed for the teacher to fulfill the goals of the institution. And one which is, we call it selected not by the teacher. And one which is choice, right? That's the one the teacher can pursue. And again, you don't need huge resources. We talked about in my plenary about the impact of the Web 2.0 and how there's a lot out there online that needs to be well curated and well selected. But once we make that selection, and you very, very quickly see how reputable a blog can be, then you go to it. over and over and over. So you have your own system there, and then if people are just allowed time to meet and work together, and it has to be paid, right? Because all the research indicates that unless there is some compensation, people are not fully invested in it.
You talked about like some sort of rules or kind of code of practice for using Web 2.0, such as blogs or maybe podcasts, for example. Would those rules be imposed on the bloggers themselves, or would it just be we're going to point you towards the best kind of
I would say there should be two prongs to this argument, if you wish. One that has to do with the technical bit, because let's be honest, I can sit in my home, in my computer, and just blabber something out, put it online, and call it my voice cast or whatever, right? And maybe I'm saying awful things or things which are... I once listened to a podcast, and I don't know if I could say this, where somebody said that by the end of the primary school, this person was talking about learning through immersion, learning languages through immersion. Well, by the end of the primary school, acquisition is over. So when students go on to middle school and high school, learning should start. So forget about grammar in the primary and do only grammar in the secondary level. Oh my God, I mean... And I kept thinking, how many people around the world are going to be listening to this and saying, oh, I heard it on the internet. Right?
Yeah.
So there has to be some sort of control that is given by peers. Okay. And I think that we have been successful so far, because we've all seen these very popular blogs that were all about what to do on Monday morning, a couple of techniques. But there was no substance, or how to use this app. And those started disappearing as soon as the apps became outdated. Or there's more to the needs of the teachers than just the technique of what to do on Monday morning. I think those blogs have to have a place, but they cannot be the go-to and be hailed as the main source. So curation by peers. And I would go for peer refereeing, right? If you have a good blog or a good podcast, you have peers commenting on it and doing reviews. And the other one has to do with the technical, right? You want quality stuff. I mean, because we deserve quality stuff. I'm sure that if you go to buy an electronic and you see that it has been poorly designed, and the materials are not good, you wouldn't buy it. So why are we consuming, if you wish, information which is not of quality? Because let's also be honest, there are a lot of poachers out there, right? And there are people who want to make a buck, and teachers are a captive audience sometimes, right?
I'm wondering if could it not be part of the professional development process to reflect on what you're hearing or reading as well. So not just accepting things, but being critical of things.
And one thing that happens in many cultures is that this is a completely personal view, and I own it 100%. Not every society is a society that fosters reflection. Particularly when you've been through protracted periods of dictatorship or totalitarian governments, reflecting is not something that comes to you second nature. That's why I like to say that reflection to me is like swimming or learning to swim. You learn to swim, first of all, if there is a body of water nearby where you can dip yourself. In the same sense, you reflect if there is a reflective culture around you. And preferably if somebody teaches you. Right? So both things are needed. And I come from a country that sustained a protracted period of dictatorship. The region is not just a country, it's the whole of Latin America, the 70s up to the mid-80s, where dictatorship, and if you thought you disappeared or you were killed or put in prison. So people are suspicious of reflection. So one of the things that I do is I teach my students how to reflect. And I was so happy in Steve Mann's
Yeah.
Workshop, right? I give them like a rhetorical organization. First you describe the event, then you analyze it, and in analyzing it, you gauge the impact on yourself and on your students. But then the last thing is a commitment to the future of doing. What are you going to do with this? It's not just speculating, oh, this worked well and why, but now how are you going to continue growing in the future? And I think that is what ties reflection together.
I want to go back. You mentioned that people reflect in different ways in different parts of the world, and it kind of is quite loaded in places. And one idea that I'm trying to kind of develop myself is like the idea of parallelism, and that we're maybe local teachers and foreign teachers in a given context are on two separate parallel lines of professional development.
Oh yeah.
And I'm wondering if we are working together, or are we pulling in different directions?
Well, again, that's an interesting dimension. I mean, I keep thinking about what I was sharing of Silvana's ideas. So that is a two-dimensional thing. You're bringing in a cultural third dimension to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because you might be working in the same institution, holding completely different sets of values and having had completely opposite educational experiences. Like people now, everywhere, in many places in the world, they do debates. I remember that, if you did a debate club in my country when I was studying, you were called a terrorist.
Wow.
Because there was one truth that came from the authorities, and you didn't dispute it, right? So I was very fortunate to be able to go abroad towards the end of high school, in one of those youth exchange programs to the States. And I simply was just flabbergasted that students were actually criticizing, student council elections, all those things. Like, what? Well, because I came from something that was not. So the idea there is, which culture are you going to privilege? Are you going to privilege the institutional culture, the teaching culture of the country, or the teaching culture of the country of the teacher who's a foreigner? I think that there is where the institution can become a wonderful linchpin, right? Where there is cross-cultural training and multicultural learning.
Yeah. That's something that I've definitely felt from my experience working with Japanese and other non-Japanese teachers, is we all seem to have our own traditions or things that we do to professionally develop, and they don't often overlap. And sometimes they do.
But you see, if you have a space where you can sit down and share them, that would be the ideal thing. Right.
I want to stick with like the particular institution, and a lot of institutions also impose. In Japan, it's very common to have limited contracts. Particular schools impose a way of teaching. I'm just wondering how can we keep teachers motivated, because the already motivated ones will continue to professionally develop. But how can, when we have these kind of things in place, how can we really?
I think there's where the role of professional associations becomes paramount.
Like
JALT, for example. A place where you have a forum to keep on growing, but also a forum to voice your concerns, your professional concerns. And of course, you very quickly, these associations are wonderfully welcoming. You immediately develop bonds, personal bonds with different people. So you also have an element of personal development there. I am doing the Four Corners tour, and I became very good friends with some of my hosts. And now, we met for one day, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and now we see each other here in the conference, like, hey! And there's this wave of affection and this interest in the other as a person as well as a professional. So I think that's the way to go. And professional associations need to gain a rightful place in promoting professionalism. Because they are generally run by volunteers, and it's what we do, right? So you need to professionalize the association as well.
I see. Okay. Maybe changing topic, if that's
Okay.
So one of your other areas of interest is in teacher training.
Oh,
or
absolutely.
TOT, teaching of teachers.
Teachers, yeah.
And a lot of us make that transition from being a teacher to being a teacher trainer. What are some of the reasons that you found behind educators wishing to take such a step?
Sometimes you wish to take it, sometimes somebody wishes it for you to take it.
Okay.
Because you land on the roll. Many different situations. But what I have found is that most teacher educators get there out of, let's say, most teachers of teachers. Let's skew the teacher trainer educator dichotomy because I don't think it's useful.
Right.
I think both are necessary. But a teacher of teachers is generally somebody who has a passion for improving the field of education and not just the field of English language teaching. We are more of a generalist than, or if you are enhancing the education of new teachers, you're a forward-looking person in that sense.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
But I've seen people land there for many different purposes and for many different reasons. Either there are those who get tired of students and they move on to teaching adults. There are others who have had, as I said before, very successful language teachers, and because of the institutional situation, they say, okay, now you're going to become the head of internal teacher training. In the United States and in Europe, you generally become a teacher educator with very, very little teaching experience because you just go through your BA and you immediately do your master's and then your PhD, and then you become a teacher educator. Actually, a friend of mine, the current president of TEFL International, Luciana de Oliveira, she wrote an amazing article for a proposal that never got picked up for a book, where she shows how mentoring your graduate students is helping the teacher education profession survive.
Right. It's interesting what you said earlier, that you teach your students reflective skills.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there is, for myself, I find that there's a through line between my own interest in being a reflective teacher and I want to teach that base to my students. I want them to be reflective learners of English, and I'm wondering if the next step would be to then help teachers be reflective too, and I'm wondering if it's all on a kind of a continuum of...
Well, you see, there's theoretically there's a theory called triad theory, and that tries to explain the interactions that happen between student teachers, their mentors, and their university professors. Right. And the theory is just simple but mind-blowing. When the mentor and the student teacher are working together, the triad is the mentor at the top because of the experience, the teacher learner or student teacher, and the students.
Right.
But once the university professor comes to play a role in the triad, the students disappear because the university professor takes over the role of the mentor. The mentor becomes a mediator between the teacher educator and the student teacher.
Yeah.
You don't see many conferences for teacher educators to learn and continue developing professionally.
Right, I see, yeah.
It is kind of understood that the professional development of a teacher educator is his or her research.
Yeah.
But who says that we don't also need a place where we share our ideas, where we learn to reflect with others? Because it's very easy to teach reflection to others. Now, my reflective skills can get sometimes a little bit rusty.
Okay.
Right? How much am I actually contributing to the reflection of others by becoming reflective?
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask about was some of the roles of teachers include mediating teachers' knowledge and scaffolding their kind of ongoing learning. How can teacher trainers get the best out of their students? And I've put here cultivate adaptive teachers, which is something you mentioned earlier on today.
To me, everything is about community. if we understand our profession as why do we all come together? Well, because we like teaching, and we like teaching English. That makes us a very specific community of practice.
Yeah.
If we understand teacher education as the welcoming into the community of practice of new members, then by definition, the way communities operate, old-timers, the teacher educators, would need to shift their practices to welcome new members. So my role is not a role of teaching or lecturing or directly transmitting a set body of knowledge. It's a matter of helping a person become acculturated to the community and helping them gain more participation space.
Right.
So, because in this view, learning is perceived as being able to participate. The more you participate, the more you learn. And once you've learned, it's the moment when you start developing.
Yeah, I see.
So my take on this is that the teacher of teachers is there just to do that, to mediate, to provide the tools necessary for that new educator to be able to get a grip on the job, and also to scaffold.
Yeah.
And when you scaffold, what you do is you don't simplify things for the other person. You give the person either information, support, resources, or tools that will allow them to independently do what they cannot do independently now.
Right.
So that necessarily has a forward-looking perspective, because you are doing an intervention today so that the person can become the teacher that he or she is going to be tomorrow. Right?
Yeah. Something we talked about on our podcast recently is the kind of the recent debate that I believe was going on in, I can't remember the journal, but there was a recent debate about whether language teachers should be engaging with research and be researchers, and do they need research, and
Let me quote Donald Freeman. He wrote a wonderful little book, 1998, where he says, teacher research is a story of two nouns separated by a hyphen. Teachers, and there he says, teachers don't see themselves as doing research. They see themselves as using research.
Right.
But I think that has historical roots. It's how the teaching profession was born. Remember that originally there were schools for teachers that were not parts of universities. So from that moment on, teachers were second-class citizens. And because the focus was on what they had to do in the classroom, there was literally no room for research. However, research became polarized because it ended up being just a personal project of people in the ivory tower. And when you try to bring down the research to the teachers, one of the arguments they have for criticizing teacher research is teachers don't read research. Well, the genre used for the dissemination of research findings is very academic, and it's so thick. Think of a non-native speaker teacher trying to read one of those thick articles. It will take them forever to do that. And also, who makes the decisions of what to research? Teachers are very seldom consulted, is the researcher. So we need to start valuing what is happening in the classroom. There's one slow by steady movement happening in the ELT world, spearheaded by Paula Rebolledo and Richard Smith. They developed this idea of exploratory action research, which makes a tiny bit of an addition to the traditional action research cycle by including an exploratory phase done by the teacher to really find out if what they're going to research is necessary. And they very explicitly say that you don't have to solve a problem. You may have a concern, but you may have a motivation as well. Well, what if I did this in another way? Okay, how would that affect my students? Going through the exploration phase is what makes the teacher take perspective. And then the intervention and following the action research cycle is very easy. Another important thing in that paradigm is, and I would like to see that as a paradigm, is that the way research is communicated has the teacher as a target.
Right.
Because the way they communicate is if you don't want to write it, you don't have to write it up as an article. You can create a poster. You can create a podcast on your research. You can create a web page. But why always just go into the academic genre?
Yeah.
Critics will say, well, that's not prestige research. So, well, actually, I know the question has been asked. Would this be considered a valid research method? To me, it's much more valid than, say, for example, non-participatory observation followed up by an interview, because the motivation stems from the teacher. And the teacher engages other teachers in the institution and the students in their research. To me, that's much more valid for generating situated, contextually relevant knowledge than having a researcher from the university sit in my class, observe me from his or her lens, and then dictating judgments about me and my students, right?
Yeah. I'm also wondering, what's the role of the teacher of teachers in bringing research to trainee teachers? Is there we talked earlier about being a middleman.
Oh, yeah.
Could it be, is that a similar thing, I wonder? Or?
I talk about 4 perspectives in teacher education. And they kind of intend to sum up the history of teacher education, which is not a very long English language teacher education, let's put it like this, right? It's not a very long profession, a very old profession that has a long history. As a teacher educator, you need to keep abreast of research developments. However, you also embody a certain perspective, and you're going to do readings of research in general within your area of interest and within the school of thought you adhere to. Again, that's another element of the teacher educator being apolitical.
Right.
Because in giving my students access to that theory, I'm denying that other theory.
I see, yeah.
So one of the roles for teacher educators, I think, is to present all the options that you are aware of. I don't skew anything. I don't leave anything out. And I tell my students, I read this, and I just read one article. I thought this was important that you guys have access to it.
Yeah.
And then what I do is, because I teach either freshmen or sophomores, and they are just beginning to get into the classroom. They are real beginners. Sometimes I need to do like translation of the research, summaries of the research.
I see,
Right? The way I found that works very well is, undergrads now don't like to read. So I tell them we're going to have one written test in the semester, and that is going to be based on theory. Now, if you want, I want you to read everything that I give you, and my courses are generally reading heavy. But then we discuss this in class before, and then I give them the article. Write a summary and send it to me, and I will make comments on the summary. And then on the day of the test, I will print out the summaries you've sent me, and you can use them to inform your writing.
I see.
And that has worked very well, because you see, that's pure scaffolding in action.
Yeah.
We start from what the students know about the topic, generally folk theories. I present in a not more than half an hour lecture the main tenets of the research. They go on and read the article, and then they summarize it, and then they apply it.
Right.
So by the 5th iteration, they have had access.
And I guess there's also reflecting on that as well.
In writing the summary, they need to, the condition is, how do these ideas apply or depart from your reality?
Yeah.
Just that.
Right, I see. Okay, thank you. That's answered my question. Perhaps just one final question.
Good.
And, the core question that we should continue to ask ourselves is, how best can we serve our learners? And coming to conferences, being a teacher of teachers, doing our own professional development. How can we not lose focus of this and keep this in mind?
Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy, particularly with the kind of teaching loads that we all have at any level. I think, again, having your own personal learning network is the answer.
Yeah.
Right? I have a very, very small personal learning network on Facebook. And we're all like-minded, obsessive about social cultural learning theory, university professors who are doing teacher education. And we do wonderful things. We run ideas through each other. We send each other manuscripts that we've written for criticism. And believe me, I mean, I particularly one of my colleagues, I would say, if you are this mean with your students, poor students, but that is the way you keep engaged.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you learn a lot from other people, right?
Yeah.
Co-authoring something with Silvana was a wonderful writing experience. We came up with new ideas, and that is how things work in that sense.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps we'll end the interview there.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else to add.
No, just that. Very glad to be here in Japan, and I hope that the dialogue that starts today will continue.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to today's podcast, and we'd like to say thank you to Gabriel for agreeing to the interview. As usual, if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send an email to TEFLology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. You can like our Facebook page, which is the TEFLology Podcast on Facebook, and you can also go to our website, which is TEFLology-podcast.com, to find all of our previously recorded episodes and interviews.